And while my story doesn't feature an ant, it features a bug of a different kind. 1 week. My husband was going to be away for one glorious week, and I couldn't wait for the culinary calamity that I would get to impose upon the kitchen during this week to myself. My first morning without my husband, I awoke to the sounds that were not him in my face, raving about his latest hyperfixation, like most couples do. Save for the dulcet sounds of Sazerac purring at my heels, all was quiet and right at Courtney Shade. I sauntered down the stairs with the ethereal grace of Celine Dion from one of her music videos from the 90s. I put on some water to make coffee and set out to make an elaborate breakfast. It was over the roaring sounds of the kettle. I could hear Vesper chirping. I assumed it was in response to her watching the birds outside as she normally does. Until my own senses were tingling and I could feel and hear the sounds of an unwanted critter. I turned around, and that's when I saw a cockroach crawling carelessly across my living room wall and then immediately to underneath a bookshelf. This is the first cockroach we have seen in this house that we have now lived in for 2 years, and my husband is gone. My cats no longer wish to help me because, as if out of sight, out of mind, they no longer wish to help me hunt a bug that to them is visually no longer a threat. I armed myself with a can of Raid and all the confidence of somebody who would so much rather defer this task to their husband. And I assaulted the perimeter of this bookshelf with an obscene amount of the pungent chemical laden spray. Absolutely repulsive. No sign of the cockroach. Tortured, terrified, and absolutely tormented, I wanted to know how I would even begin to pick up the pieces of my shattered morning. Chose to find solace in an omelet. I went back to the kitchen. And it was at that moment that I set a pan with some oil on top of the stove to begin heating, and I was chopping some veg. Sazerac, as he usually does, was weaving throughout my legs, trying to see what was going on top of the kitchen counter, at which point I had to explain to him yet again. Says, you know you're not allowed on the countertop. I know, I'm a really mean cat mom, but it's really for your own safety, son. He meowed. He was completely unaffected by this explanation. And then, as if with the smug demeanor of Rasputin, who just dodged his second murder attempt, I look over and the cockroach is back to crawling across the damn wall. Running over, I arm myself with the only thing I can find at this point, an empty cardboard box, at which point I just managed to throw it atop the cockroach before it evaded the clutches of my 5 foot tall self. Feeling trapped somewhere between a cockroach and a hard place, I didn't really know what my next move should be until the flexibility skills from my 5th grade dance classes kicked in, at which point I kind of began to do the splits to try to coax anything, a book from the shelf towards me. I start to get it, and it was in count of 3, 1, 2, 3. I grabbed the book, I wedged it between the wall and the cardboard box. I made it to the front door and I threw it out across the lawn. The cardboard box containing the cockroach, but not the book. I'm not a monster. It was only then that my heart rate began to lower and I began to reassess and reevaluate my morning. I wanted to make my breakfast. As I turned the corner, heading back into the house and looking into the kitchen, what do I see but a shrieking Sazerac in front of me? Despite his better judgment, he jumped up on top of the stove, his paw catching the handle from the pan, the heating oil covering his body, and he began to run around frantically, at which point my own cat-like reflexes kicked in. I turned off the stove, I threw the pan in the sink, and I grabbed a dish rag and ran it under cold water. I had to find my oily boy. It was only as I began to run up the stairs, he ran down the stairs. And as I ran back down the stairs, he ran back up until the Scooby Doo esque chase finally ended with him leaping into my arms. I will say, after looking him over, he was completely fine, save for a severely bruised ego. He needed a bath, and I, at that point, completely gave up the notion of a quiet, bug free breakfast. After his bath, drying him off, we both began to lick our wounds. I was saddened, suds ridden, and seemingly alone with all these frustrations from the morning. I had to vent it out to somebody. I called my mother. I said, Mom, you would not believe the morning that I have had. It's been completely ruined. I had these plans. My husband's gone. It was going to be to me, to myself. Nothing was going to get in my way. I have no idea what it's like to have plans completely ruined and all at the expense of forces completely out your control. At which point, she cuts in and interjects to say, Courtney, I was a single mother raising two kids. You and your brother never gave me a moment to myself. I never had a moment's peace due to all the messes and chaos you were creating. Of course, I understand what she went through. As if knocked back with these profound, sobering revelations, I paused and took a moment to myself, at which point I realized I only had two things to say back to her. I said, number one, Mom, I really am truly so sorry for any of the stress I caused you in my younger years. And two, I am never having my own kids.